Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar with Friday Pulse founder and CEO Nic Marks. Nic is going to take us through if happiness is really a goal or a resource. And we should have some time for questions at the end, but please do drop us a note in the chat or the Q&A as we go through too, if you would like. And I will now hand over to Nic.
Thank you, Angela. And Angela will be monitoring the chat. And please do add to it, and we can address anything as we go along. I've got one question definitely to put back to you quite soon, actually, at the beginning. So perfect. So is happiness a goal or resource is going to be the webinar. So just firstly, just to say a little bit about me. I'm a statistician, CEO, and now I have to pretty much say former TED speaker, because you can see I'm a lot younger in that picture. I think it's nearly 14 years ago now. Very brief bio. I did maths, statistics, and systems thinking at first at Cambridge, then Lancaster. In the 90s, I did lots of quality of life studies, was a consultant, did an MSc, trained as a therapist, which is kind of where I have this sort of odd mix of soft and hard skills comes from. 2000s, I founded Centre for Wellbeing at the London think tank, the New Economics Foundation, and some of the work I'm best known for is the Happy Planet Index and 5 Ways to Wellbeing. Just a little bit of news today, Happy Planet Index, we've got a new host for it called Hot and Cool Institute in Berlin, which is my work on sustainability. But I'm not really going to talk about that today, but you can always ask me in the questions. 2010, I did my TED Talk, did the first Happiness at Work survey, founded a business, and we launched Friday Pulse towards the end of the 2010s. I haven't got anything in the 20s because it's emerging. What's really emerging for me at the moment is I'm writing a book at the moment, so that will hopefully be out late this year or probably next year, but we'll see. Today is International Day of Happiness. So a resolution was adopted by the UN, and I quite like some of the words in it, in that it goes, they were conscious that the pursuit of happiness is a fundamental human goal. They recognize the relevance of happiness and well-being as being universal goals. And this I love. They decide to proclaim the 20th of March International Day of Happiness. I mean, it feels like they should be a town crier going out ringing a bell. Yay, it's International Day of Happiness, but it is today. And what it also means today is it's the day that they launched the World Happiness Report. And it's come out today. This is the first sight of the data for who is top, and it's Finland again, Denmark, Iceland, Israel, Netherlands, and that this data is interesting. So firstly, that's what the scores are for now. You can see the UK is in 19th place, US 15th. Other countries that we've typically seen as being quite happy, such as Switzerland, have dropped to 8th, Norway 7th. But it's normally the same crew in there. Probably the one surprising one this year is Israel hitting into the top 4. If you look over the right-hand side here in very small things, they basically look for the 95% confidence limit. So they're very confident that Finland is ranked number 1. But Denmark could be anywhere between 2 and 4. Israel could be anywhere between 2 and 8. So you can see that there is some sort of a variance here. I'm a little critical that they go to 3 decimal places, would be my thing. I think they should be doing 1 or 2 decimal places. But that's what the data is. This is actually last year's, and you can see last year it was also Finland, Denmark, Iceland as the top 3. There's a few things to say about this. Notice here it says it's a 3-year rolling average. So that's going to make it even more stable. And it also sort of reinforces the idea that somehow happiness is a destination. This is a picture I picked up of Finland, very beautiful, obviously, looks a bit cold, but the Northern Lights look stunning. But, it sort of reinforces the idea that somehow, it would be illogical to move to Finland to be happier, because you'd have no social relationships, you'd have no nothing really that connects you to it. If you're born in Finland and raised in Finland, great, but more it's about how the whole country's doing which is relevant. But it's sort of, how relevant is it to us, working in organizations, to know that Finland is the happiest place. And actually the media kind of picks up this. So this is, it's actually the travel sections that we're picking up when I look today. So this is CNN, saying it's the one, and Forbes. Again, it's the travel people who are saying, that 6th year in a row, Finland's named the happiest country. Is that really helpful? They seem a little more skeptical in Finland. Drug abuse, job cuts, in the world's happiest country. So, I think most countries I've always seen, when they come top, they always think, oh, come on, look at all our problems. So, there's still things going on in Finland. But one thing I think really to look at is, what is the question behind the rankings? So this is the question. It's called the Cantrell Ladder of Life, right? And so if you look at this question, so, you've got to imagine a ladder. Well, I put one for you with the steps numbered from 0 to 10. The top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you, and the bottom, the worst possible life for you. And then people are asked to say, where would they sit on that ladder? I mean, is this happiness? It's just to ask the question, really. It's like, it's not a very emotional question. It's, when we think of happiness, we often think of happiness about being a positive emotion, energetic. This is much more a sort of evaluation. It's called a cognitive evaluation, a question like this. But it's sort of, I find it interesting that there's this fudge that goes on, that this is talked about as happiness in the World Happiness Report. And I think it's a really open question, what it is. And actually, I'd like to know what you think. Do you think that's happiness? Put it in the chat. Do you think it is? What does it make you think of when you answer that question? But, is that what you feel, how we should be measuring happiness globally? Does it feel, I don't know. What does it put? Just put in the chat there. And I'll open the chat window so that I can see that. And whilst we're there, someone said there, what a surprise to see Israel. Yeah, in a sense, Israel is a surprise to see in there. Again, if you're looking at this as a comparison, between different things, then maybe Israel look where they are in the geopolitical region and they feel happier than they could do in that area, or possibly the past. So I know, for example, typically in the UK, Northern Ireland comes out top. Possibly, past issues have been there, but yeah. So a couple of comments here. So is it too subjective? Actually, Sam, I would say it's not subjective enough, but we can get to that in the sense that there's a couple of ways to use the word subjective. I use it in the terms it puts you at the subject of it. And there is no definition exactly of happiness. I would agree with that. But any other comments are welcome in there too. But that's what the data is based on. So, and it kind of reminds me of a joke about two economists. So just close the chats, put that back away. So it reminds me of a joke about two economists. And here are two economists. And of course, these are two authors of the World Happiness Report. So Lord Richard Layard on the right, who is a professor at London School of Economics, who's been absolutely champion of happiness for the last 20 years or so. And on the left is Professor Jean-Emmanuel Deneve from Oxford University, who I know and like. And so I do know and like these two guys very much. But the joke about an economist is that there's two economists going to a party, and one goes up to the other and says, "How is your wife?" And the other one says, "Compared to what?" And there is the joke, because for an economist, evaluations are about comparison. So if you, what's my next slide? Now, if you go back to this, I think it invites us to compare ourselves very much to how other people are feeling, rather than an internal way of thinking about happiness. So, so some other things. Anya, I've been asked the same questions, best way to measure. There are many scales, and this is one of them. Yeah. Not sure if a ladder is a good image. I think I agree with you, Suzanne. So I think that a ladder instills more of a sort of materialistic view of life, that it's more about a vertical ladder in our image is sort of more about what you've got in life. I think a horizontal scale, which is what we normally have from left to right, is going to have lower effect with that. But I've asked this several times. I find it hard for people to investigate that it's entirely feasible to do so. But yeah, I'm not sure the latter is good. So the two jokes about The Economist, but I'm going to talk a little bit about economics and how we've got to the idea that happiness is this kind of destination in a way. And it really goes back a long way. So this is Jeremy Bentham. If you wonder why he's looking like he's in a telephone box, actually Jeremy Bentham, after he died, was embalmed, I guess, I don't know, and he is available to be seen at University College London. You can go there and he is in this box. There are lots of legends of students stealing him out of the box sometimes over the centuries, but he is there. He popularized the idea of the greatest happiness of the greatest number. You know, this is a good thought, in my opinion. And he defined self-interest as a rational activity based on a calculus of pleasure and pain. And I think this is a partial truth. I think we obviously do things which move us towards pleasure and away from pain. The rational is interesting, but you know, it's not a terrible definition. And he was a very benevolent guy. We're talking the 1700s, 1800. He was in favor of equal rights for women very early for that, and he was in favor of decriminalizing homosexuality as well. So you know, he was a good person, I'm sure. He's definitely become the father of what is called utilitarianism, which is the idea that we have a sort of utility function, an internal utility function, which is where I'm going with this argument, really. His ideas were picked up by this very handsome man. Obviously, I think he's handsome. He's got relatively long hair and a beard. But Leon Warous, who was a French economist, and he was very motivated to make economics more scientific, more mathematical. He borrowed a lot of ideas and models from what was the newly emerging discipline of physics. And he had a special interest in equilibriums, moving towards equilibriums. If any of you did economics at university or A-level or whatever, you know, it's a lot about equilibriums in markets. And equilibriums were very interesting to him because they could be solved with calculus. And physics definitely looks towards equilibriums. If he had borrowed models from biology, he would have had models, and they wouldn't really have had mathematical models then, but biology is about being away from equilibrium because it's a dynamic process being alive. It's not a stable equilibrium. The most stable equilibrium is heat death in the end. So he borrowed equations which are very much geared towards stability. And as I said, you know, Gallup and the World Happiness Reports chooses a very stable measure, you know, that ladder. And also they average it over 3 years as well, which I also think is troublesome. Warous argued that we didn't need to know people's internal calculus. Instead, we could observe their revealed preferences. And this was the big trick of economics, was to say, well, it's all, you know, it's like a black box in there. We don't know what you're doing. You're making a calculus, but we can observe your behavior and all is good. And of course, that allows economists to basically go that people's consumption pattern, how much they spend, is equal to their welfare, because their revealed preferences in the market, they wouldn't have spent the money if it wasn't improving it. They must value what they're getting at the rate they're doing, so the value to their well-being must be exactly that, which is a very troublesome place to go to, because, you know, it basically insinuates that someone that's 10 times richer than someone else must be 10 times happier, which is a nonsense. But you know, it's basically what became fixed into the way that economics dealt with the issues. And it also requires the assumption that people are perfectly rational all of the time. I think we all know we fail on that. And I started to become aware of this a bit later. I went to this was a physicist, so I forgot to put a slide. At the same time, Henry Poincare, I don't know if that's how you say his name, sorry. Anyone French can, I don't know, send me a voicemail of how I say it. But he was a physicist at the same time. He was quite critical of Warous's simplifications. You know, he knew Warous's interest in his equations. He said, you regard men as infinitely selfish and infinitely foresighted. That's the perfect rational, and in self-interest. And he said, the first hypothesis may perhaps be admitted in the first approximation. So he was sort of prepared to go along a bit with the fact that we might be selfish, whether infinitely. It could be a first approximation. The second may call for some reservations. I love the understatement here. But basically, he thought it was a load of nonsense. He was pretty much ignored by economists who had their new equations. They could solve them. They could do mathematical thing, and they felt very good about that. And if any of you know the history of economics, then there's all sorts of theories and models which never got proved it when they actually in reality. So although the equations were fancy, they didn't actually meet up with it. And I really first became with this. I went to a talk by this man, Manfred Max Neef, who is a Chilean economist, and he'd written a paper called A Stupid Way of Life. He was very funny. He died a few years ago. He became one of my great mentors in life. But I went to this, and in this lecture I went to, which must be 1988, 1989, he basically said a version of this. This is a quote from the paper. He said, "We are trapped, whether we want to be or not, in the language of economics, which has domesticated the entire world. The language is used in the kitchen, in centers of culture, in the workplace and bedroom. Whatever part of the world, we are dominated by the language of economics, and it heavily influences our behavior and perceptions." And I think it heavily influences our way of understanding about happiness. We basically sort of remove utility and put happiness in the place. And it, if I actually love the World Happiness Report, and I really like Jean Emmanuel and Richard Layard. I'm not really criticizing them, but I think sometimes when economists look at the happiness data, they think they found their long lost utility function, and that they've got it now. We've always known it was a bit of a black box in there, perfect rationality, but now we've got it. It's this 0 to 10 scale of happiness, and I think it's a little more complex than that, and a bit more complex than this ladder. Which I think it evokes stability, evokes more materialistic comparisons between people. So what does make for a good indicator? I mean, this is people's careers. This is actually partly my career, and it's a lot my career, and it was something I've thought about a lot over the decades. I started, as I said, working this in the 1990s, and this paper came out in 2001. And it was about how to create quality of life indexes for national policy. It was written by, at the time, the great and the good of quality of life research. I mean, these won't be names that mean very much to you probably, but these are all people that I know, all of them. Yes, I met all of them. And they were doing a lot of work on how you could create indicators. And everybody's got their own indicator. Look, I've got one, if not more, Happy Planet and all sorts of things. So, how do you assess them? So what they started to do was they defined 14 criteria, and then they assessed the 22 most popular quality of life indexes. It's a technical statistical paper in lots of ways, but it can be summarized that what the criteria they needed to do was to have a clear purpose. If you're going to make one for policy, for changing the world, you need to have a very clear purpose about what you're doing. It needs to be constructed in a transparent way that people can understand it. It needs to be malleable to policy, and it needs to have a time series and be resonant with ordinary people. And if I'm not sure that World Happiness Report really cuts this, it's got a clear purpose. It's measuring the happiness of nations. It is constructed in a transparent manner. In fact, they're very good to share all the data, but is that happiness, that question? Is it malleable to policy? Somewhat. I mean, it basically makes a drive for more trust in society, for better social safety networks, for lower income inequality. So the things that it actually does, it tends to drive you to a social demographic, a democratic sort of thing, like most of Nordic countries are. Does it resonate with ordinary people? I don't know. I don't think people really look at the World Happiness Report and think, oh, Finland, it's great, this is that. I don't know, partly. What I do think resonates more is better granular data. Now, we've obviously all been through this huge thing, which was the pandemic. But if you think back to 2020 and you think about your happiness during that year, I wonder, did it look a bit like this? Did 2020 feel quite a roller coaster of how we felt? So this is data actually that came from the World Happiness Report in 2021, but actually they were reprinting data from YouGov. It was very buried in chapter 7. But basically, this is January, February, happiness going along, different groups having different experiences. Huge drop in March 2020 when COVID started to hit. A rise back towards where we are. We had the summer of Eat Out to Help Out. We then had more restrictions going down there. And to me, when I put this data for people, people can see themselves in the data. We see how we are. I mean, you can put again in the chat if you want to about whether that a bit feels like your year, but because this is YouGov, we can actually extend this data. So I've actually downloaded it right to the beginning of this month. This is the same data, just doing the whole population. You can see the COVID lockdowns, here. So this is the first one. The other data basically truncated just there. This is the second one in January, February of 2021. This was more driven by fear and huge, chaos. This was driven by boredom, and then you can see it going up and down ever since. You can see in this data, Christmas holiday peaks over the time. So, people tend to be happier, all on holiday at the same time then. There's a little peak in fear and anxiety those weeks as well. Obviously, Christmas isn't great for everybody. You can see the end of summer blues every year. You can see a drop from summer afterwards. So Christmas, we all holiday at the same time, so it peaks in 1 week. Summer, we're over, a longer period. We also have better weather. Weather definitely impacts some of these little jiggles for sure. These are seasonal effects. I just put them into monthly data. You can basically see people are happier in the summer. More likely. The percentages, by the way, are the percentage of people saying they were happy last week. That's what this data is based on. It's a rolling sample of 1,000 to 2,000 people. The World Happiness Report is an annual survey of 1,000 people in each country. That's why they make it into a 3-year rolling average so they can get the sample sizes up. So it's not really enough investment in the sample sizes. That's why you get quite a lot of standard error of the mean there. But you can see the seasonal effects. I put it into spring, summer, autumn. Summer is, much happier. Obviously, we're in this bit here. In fact, here, March is lower than February. And I've actually taken out March 2020 there because of the COVID effect. So that's not that pure effect of COVID, though COVID is through all of these numbers, obviously. But you can also see big events in the data. So here you can see Russia invading Ukraine. So the big drop there. You can see here the Queen dying, cost of living crisis. That will also be autumn, also be the Liz Truss government. But that big drop there, which is bigger than we'd expect, going on. And there's a very significant drop since pre-COVID. And I find this very troublesome about the World Happiness Report is we're not picking up with the fact that people are feeling less happy on a weekly basis. So I put the data here. This is the YouGov only started measuring in July 2019, but thank goodness they did before COVID. I mean, it's brilliant. We've got at least, 7-8 months before COVID, what we typically expect. This is the COVID year. So we now got years. And basically, on average, pre-COVID, 50% of people were saying they were happy any week. And that's down to 44% now. Maybe it doesn't sound much, but basically that means that 4 million people last week who we would have expected to say they were happy did not say they were happy. 4 million in the UK. That's a lot of people. And I think we're all feeling it to an extent, but I think there is a feeling of depletion in the UK, probably globally. COVID was very disruptive. Yes, disrupted us, but it also made us, I think, all think about what life was about and everything. And, it's an interesting phenomena. And I'm just very, very shocked that we're not seeing these kinds of drops in that cantrell ladder of life. This, I believe, is good data. YouGov a good polling agency. So it's Gallup, and they're collecting this data every week. And it reminded me of a quote. This is Annie Dillard. She's a poet and an author with my favorite US president ever. And this is a quote from her. She said, "How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives." And I think that applies to our weeks. A week is a good measure because it's sort of time that you can ask people to reflect. You can't ask them to reflect every day, but how we spend our weeks is how we spend our lives. And if we've got 4 million people in the UK not saying they were happy last week that we expect to, I think that means they've got less happy lives. And I'm not convinced the Cantrell ladder of life with the small sample of 1,000 people. So if YouGov are collecting 1,000 people a week, that's 50,000 a year. It's a much bigger sample, much stronger. I'm really not convinced it's picking up that change. So it has implications for measurement, by the way, and in a way, implications for annual surveys in businesses. I don't think they pick up the change as well as weekly do. But if you look at that, so if you look at that shape of that graph, I mean, the graph is about weekly data, collecting it, making a time trend. But also, is that not a bit how single days often feel to us? We have a bad morning, we get better, whatever. We go up and down in a day. I think, we have, our happiness has got almost different wavelengths, if you like. There's a daily wavelength, a weekly, annual one. If you're as old as me, you have good and bad decades. So I think of happiness as like a wave function. I think it's better thought about like that, rather than just a pure outcome measure or just a state you get to. The language we use around it. The pursuit of happiness, as if you get there. A state of happiness. Happiness is very, very dynamic. Very, very dynamic. Well, this could almost be a single day. And actually, data from I've been looking at recently actually shows a similar pattern for a single day. This is from big sample of 30,000 French speakers on using a social media app, where they signed up to a month tracking of their daily happiness, but they were bleeped several times a day. How happy were you? So there's another app in this country called Mappiness, which also does a similar thing, but it's looking at how happy people were the day. So this is the average happiness during the day. So the average lowest happiness is in the morning, possibly the commute to work. Highest happiness is in the evening, but you get tired after that. So, you can see that there's a wave. It doesn't really matter. All of us are going to be jigging around this, we might be down in the afternoon, but you're more likely to be better then. And they found lots of things in the survey. So this on the vertical axis is the proportion of time you spent with people and your average happiness level. Basically, unsurprisingly, spending time with other people is highly correlated with our happiness. This was a more surprising result. So this on the horizontal axis is happiness at time 1, and at time 2, were you with another person? And what this was saying was that when we feel low, when we're over here, we're more likely to then, next time you're bleeped, be spending it with another person. We regulate our moods. When we feel down, we do things, we intervene. We don't just sit here passively noticing I'm having a bad day. We do things about it to move our mood. So when we feel down, we see one of the ways we adjust our mood. It won't be the only way. It's just what's picked up in this survey, is that they seek out other people. Interestingly, I think this is quite amusing, not all other people have the same impact on us. They asked to categorize the type of people you were with. On the left was the probability you sort them out. So a best friend and a friend, where you're more likely to seek out a friend because you've got more of them than best friends. So, those are the top 2. Other family is almost like a friend, because why would you phone your cousin unless, why would you do that? Your siblings are down here, your parents are down here. So you're most likely to contact these people. But this is their impact on your happiness. So best friend had the biggest impact, friends the next. Look down here, parents is even slightly negative impact on your happiness, which is, I think, probably reflects that a lot of us have ambiguous sometimes relationships with our parents, sometimes quite ritualized. When I phone my mum, she's 86, 87, she'll tell me what the other family is doing, and she's relaying that, and she's talking a bit about herself. But it's not so much, if I spoke to a friend, we'd be talking much more about my emotional realm. So, it's much more ritualized in a way how we interact with our parents. But I think this data is super interesting, but it's even more interesting for another reason, which is that this graph, yes, it says if we're low, we're seeking out other people, but it also means that when we feel good, we're less likely to seek out other people. The opposite is also true. That's very interesting. And what the authors suggest, well, this is their technical language for, they say, positive affective states can help in accomplishing tasks that have short-term hedonic costs, but long-term benefits, i.e. we can tackle more challenging things. We can do delayed gratification when we feel good. So when we think of happiness as an energy, rather than a goal, then we're seeing that when we're happy, we can challenge those things that we know that's going to slightly deplete us. They're not going to be the most rewarding in the short term. We want to get them done. So we will get that delayed gratification of a sense of accomplishment or something like that. But it's going to be a short-term cost to what we're doing. You can't do that if you're depleted. If you're depleted, you can't do the challenging tasks, or you're less likely, you'll do them less well. So really, I call this that when we feel good, we do good work. That's what's going on. And so that's what this is sort of supporting. And I want to show you another piece of data, about it too, which is how feeling good can lead to good work. And this is a research paper on, does employee happiness have an impact on productivity? And you'll notice that my friend John Emmanuel Deneve is there. So he doesn't only do the World Happiness Report, he does lots of other things too. I really like this study. So it's looking at happiness and sales. So it was 1,750 BT call operators across 11 call centers. Notice that these people, they are call operators. They are literally speaking on the phone to people. They're mainly doing inbound calls. There's no prospecting. We do sales here. They're not reaching out to work out who to do and who's the best chance of making a sale. They're dealing passively, in a sense, with what's coming in. Their happiness was measured weekly, as was sales. So what you could see here was that, so they had a question basically which uses things like this: how happy were you this week? And there was a difference between how much you sold. So it was actually a 13% more sales if you were happy than if you weren't, which is a relatively large effect. It's not a huge effect. I mean, but 13% extra sales is certainly not to be sniffed at, and is a very positive result. But again, they're only doing limited things on the call here, but they also could see that when people became happier, so this one here was a comparison between operators who were happy and weren't. Okay, this is the same operators moving through time, and basically, that was mapped with a correlation thing. But basically, when they were happier, they sold more than when they were happy. The same people. So in the week, let's say that if they became happier one week, they sold more. That's a very strong result. They also were able to see that the happiness was not driven by the sales, i.e. it wasn't that they got a sense of accomplishment from meeting their targets. It was, in fact, that they felt happier. And then the way they tracked that was that there were lots of these call centers all over the country. They looked at the weather. If the sun was shining, people are more likely to be happy. And that moved them from perhaps being okay to being happy, and they sold more. You can't have that causality go the other way. You can't have selling more makes you happy, makes the sun shine. Doesn't work, only works the one way. So very strong evidence that this is a causal impact, that becoming happier is driving the sales. It still doesn't quite answer why. That raises a question. So I just opened the chat to see if any of those were things, but it's Angela very helpfully pasting references for you. Why are the operators becoming happier? Why did they sell more? Happier operators were able to fulfill their schedules more completely. They worked faster, and they did better quality calls. you know, if you've got, you know, a team leader of someone, you know, running call operators, they're going to feel great that you've done your schedules more. You're going to be great if you do more calls. I mean, even more great if you've done better quality calls. It was only the last of those that translated into more sales. Okay. So completing your schedule means you're a good boy or girl, working fast, you're a fast one, but it was only the quality calls that really did it. And that's interesting, but they could then unpick what were the categories of calls that people were making. So simple order taking, more complicated contracts to negotiate, upgrades, recontracting with disgruntled customers, often with them. Note the increasing complexity going on there. When they unpicked it to that level, they found that the routine had no impact. Happiness had no impact on the routine one. Someone's just ringing in saying, right, I want to buy this. Please let me do it. Bump. No impact. Some impact from the contracts negotiation one, but much bigger with the negotiated. So this is very interesting. It's basically telling us again the same thing, that if we feel good, we're not depleted, we can deal with complexity, with challenging tasks. You know, disgruntled customers are challenging. And this goes back to something that I keep on saying, probably say in every webinar I do, which is that our social world, this is from Robin Dunbar, one of my favorite evolutionary psychologists, our social world is by far the most complex thing in the universe. In fact, I heard Brian Cox say a similar thing. Human civilization is the most complex thing in our solar system you know, that we know of in the universe. It's very dynamic, in constant flux. Keeping track of it and managing it is very demanding in information processing terms. This is purely about brain functioning. So look, you know, if our brain is very distracted with feeling miserable, unhappy, think how much you can't think straight when you're angry. You know, you're not going to be able to deal with complexity in these things. So it really becomes, we're dealing with relationships, with collaboration, with creativity. Happiness becomes positivity, feeling good becomes more and more important all the time. So really it helps us deal with complex, challenging situations and gives us resilience in a way, an ability to absorb those challenges. It's the same insight as this one. You know, when we feel good, we do good work. The same, we're getting this more granular data. Notice so this one, the French one was measuring several times a day. Quite rare to have big studies with that and looking at impacts through time. Again, the John and Manning was measuring every week. When we get this data that's more and more granular, we get more and more insights to what's actually going on and how happiness is an energy, which is really driving, you know, good performance. Again, you have to notice the opposite, that miserable people do miserable work. And this is kind of what to avoid, you know, in our workplaces, in our teams. So I'm just reading here, they radiate good energy being picked up by clients. Yeah, I'm sure that's right. You know, if you walk into, I mean, it's nothing worse. I mean, this is when you see somebody, you walk into a shop and someone's miserable, you know, you don't want to buy from them, do you? Yeah, and Sean Aker writes very good books. Yeah, does fuel it. So that's good. So advice for you when you feel stressed. Okay, so when things are getting on top of you, my advice would be to go outside, and you'll see they're smoking cigarettes. I'm not really suggesting that you should smoke cigarettes, but smokers are very good at dealing with short-term stress. What do? Well, they stop what they're doing, you know, when they're feeling stressed. They move their bodies, you know, they get up, move around. They go outside. This is the killer one. They kickstart conversations. They do that. They reach out for a friend, you know, they find someone, come have a smoke with me. And they have conversations and chat. So that's that thing about regulating our mood. They also do something which I think is less understood, but is that they basically do mindful breathing. They exhale for longer than they inhale. So if you do that rhythm of inhaling for 3-4 seconds, exhaling for 5-6 seconds, your body goes into relax mode. Why is it doing that? Because it basically knows there's not a predator, there's not a stress around, because you've got time to breathe out for a long time. So it's a very, very good way of doing it, right? And then you relax. And that spells smoker. I'm not suggesting you smoke. Obviously, clearly, all the health evidence says you shouldn't go outside and fly a paper airplane or whatever. but it's very good. It's a simple way of remembering. Smoker, stop what you're doing, move your body, go outside, kickstart conversations, exhale long enough, and relax. And that's kind of advice for you. If you get stressed, if your team does, it's a plea for a break every hour. So smokers take their statutory breaks. My son was working at a bar last summer, and late in the night, the smoker would go find the bar. Oh, I need to go and have a cigarette. Boss, can I go out? Yeah, you can. Would he be told no, he couldn't because he didn't smoke. So he actually got less breaks, but then he got more stressed. So smokers are really good at taking their breaks. They're really good at, at shaking things up, just, changing things and doing that social support. So that's great. But obviously we need a more sustainable team solution. And it kind of, this is the way that I think of it. I think of happiness and performance together, right? Which is that you've got low performing teams, high performing teams, happy and unhappy ones. You want to be in this quadrant up here where teams are happy and successful. Clearly, miserable teams, miserable people doing miserable work down there. But the diagonals are also interesting. So I think that often when I go in an organization, I talk about building happy teams. Senior leaders are worried about this quadrant. They're worried if they make a team happier, they're going to be lower performing. Their problem tends to be here, that they've got burning out teams who are unhappy and maybe performing okay. My plea would be that the only sustainable place for sustainable performance is to have happy and performing teams, because the slacking ones are going to go out of business. Miserable ones, obviously, burning out ones are going to break up the teams. They're not going to be sustainable. So if you want sustainable high performance, then thinking about happiness, well-being of teams is massively important. And in fact, just to show you the data on burnout, I asked this in a survey recently. I defined burnout quite carefully because I think there's a lot of fuzziness around it. But burnout is defined as someone who is emotionally exhausted with their work efficiency suffering due to too much involvement. Have you experienced burnout? This is just with people who said they definitely have. I gave them a middle one. Often play with the middle response code so you can sort out the medium and high. And what I found was there were many more people in the burning out teams than the slacking, and they were much more burnt out. So this is actually the percentage of them that said they were burnt out definitely over the last 12 months. And you can see a quarter of people were saying they were there. That's not sustainable for business. So this is the aim. Get to there if you want a good team solution. Happiness is really important. It drives all sorts of things: retention, productivity, even share price, innovation, creativity. It really drives all of these things. But also, it makes managing a team a lot less stressful. I mean, if you've ever managed an unhappy team, it's not a good job to have. It's not good for you as a team leader. So it's actually everyone's self-interest. So this is just quickly at the end, how to build it, why it's an investment of time. This is our methodology at Friday Pulse, which is that you measure, you meet to talk about the results, and you repeat that process actually every week. So we have a weekly check-in and a quarterly one. So the weekly is going to produce data like that BT thing. We ask you, how happy were you at work this week? You get a time trend, so the ups and downs, every team has setbacks. Think of them as an opportunity for action. Listening, you're listening to your team. How can we get better at this? And things happen all the time. Life gets in the way. We're never just happy and there. That's why annual surveys don't pick this up at all. The meet is all about having a weekly check-in. You can do this with or without data, without Friday Pulse data. How is your team doing? What went well last week? Celebrate and build on those positives. Too often we just go straight to the next challenge. Understand and tackle any frustrations. Basically, it's friction and flow. Remove the friction, increase the flow. It's a great investment. It is an investment of time, but the return on investment is actually very good. And we have features in Friday Pulse that really help make that as easy as possible. So this is the weekly thing, measure, meet, and then repeat. A repeat is how things build. So this is real data from a real team over 6 months, going from being very unhappy to being in the right zone up here, mainly green, sometimes a setback, bouncing back from a setback like that. It just doesn't happen overnight. There's no total silver bullet, but Friday Pulse can really help give you the data that can drive those conversations. We also have a quarterly deeper dive, a checkup cycle, again, measure, meet, repeat. It's a 10-minute, actually probably 5-minute questionnaire, not very long. meet, talk about them, repeat that process. So it's based on our 5 ways to happiness at work, which I've covered in other ones. We've also got a white paper you can download about that as you go to our website. But they're based on these 5 things of connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire, to build into your teams. You can think of these as like underlying drivers of happiness, over time. So you've got the weekly friction flow, which really impacts how people experience their days. As Andy Dillard said, how we experience our days is how we experience our life. How our work days go is basically how our work goes. These are driving more of the culture. We do reports on these so that you can see what's going on. So that cycle is another measure, meet, repeat cycle going on there. This is what we often get. Oh my God, I haven't got the time, and it's understandable. We're all under a lot of pressure. The UK, from the survey I was looking at recently, has got most time pressure across Europe. 30% of managers work 7.5 hours unpaid overtime every week. So there's a lot of talk about a 4-day week, which I'm pro, but for a lot of people, a 5-day week would be quite nice. Thank you very much. Managers' working hours have extended, probably due to the complexity, partly, of working from home and managing their teams with it. But must note that unhappy teams add to time pressures. So, recruitment processes, when you have to recruit, they take a lot of your time. There's not, it's good to recruit somebody new sometimes, but it's also time consuming. So leading a happy team is going to create more time. And actually, again, I'm finding lots of data to show that doing these sort of things really helps people have happier weeks. So the vertical axis is a percentage of people who had a good week last week. If their organization did a pulse survey, they were much more likely than if they had an annual survey or no survey. I'm not saying that pulse surveys drive this automatically. It's part of a suite of things that an organization are doing. Weekly meetings, people go, I haven't got a time. But actually, if you don't meet with your team, people are much less happy. I did look at whether meetings 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week was better. It wasn't really. It was just basically, were you at least meeting once a week was what basically was driving this. If you do the 2 together, so you do a pulse survey where you consult people, it's very strongly related to better weeks. So this is a stronger result than just the pulse. So that's 81% of people there. What was it? 77 there. But basically consulting, involving the team about how they can be happier has a big impact on it, participation. So is it worth the time and effort? Well, it takes 2 to 5 minutes a week to measure it, 20 minutes to meet. So that's half an hour in a 35 to 40 hour week. The returns are productivity up by 10 to 20%. So if you think of that in hours term, that's already generated 3.5, 4 hours of extra work. You've got your payback there, retention as well, and much less stress for everybody. So is happiness a goal or a resource? Finland is top of the World Happiness Report again. Economists in the UN tend to think of happiness only as a goal, but it is definitely a resource too. Annual data is only partially insightful. Weekly highlights meaningful ups and downs. The weekly mood predicts sales as we've seen it. So basically that getting into that weekly stuff is really important. Feeling good enables us to engage with complexity. I think that's really interesting. We can deal with the challenges much better when we feel good than when we feel depleted. And that's what I see in the data. I see more people being depleted. Think of smoker if you're stressed, and think of using Friday Pulse for your team if they are. So that's the end of the webinar. So we're very happy to have questions in the Q&A, in the chat. And you can see I come down on the thing that happiness is more of a resource. It is a goal as well, but it's more of a resource, and how we measure it is really important for that. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nic. And yes, as Nic said, if you can put your questions in the Q&A, that would be brilliant. We do have a question from Fiona already, Nic, to say, would you measure the same day every week? And is Friday the best day of the week to do it?
So I've definitely looked at measuring every day of the week, and kind of what you find is that Tuesday looked to be slightly the least happy day of the week. Not Wednesday, a lot of people think, or Monday. But people get very bored very quickly answering every day. So, like that French study, you'd be bleeped 4 or 5 times a day. That's a little bit annoying. So I think we work in week sprints. So we get to the end of the week. look back. It's called episodal measurement. Does have a slight what we call peak end effect, which is that how you feel on Friday is going to make you feel slightly different, but that then picks up the sense of accomplishment of, you know, achieving your goals in the week. So I think it's really the best measure. It's very pragmatic, creates those really nice time trends, which is what you need. So I think it ticks pretty much all of the boxes. It's not to say you couldn't have different cadences. I think, you know, you could do monthly and it worked, but you have to wait a long time to know whether people are recovered. You have to wait 4 or 5 weeks for the next measure. So weekly is really good. And we work in sprints, so it works. It tends to work very well. We don't have, you know, many people saying they can't do that.
And then Marcella, I think, is asking, like, do you work on happiness in schools?
So we don't work with the students. We do have some colleges and schools who are clients who work with the employees. So that would be the staff and the non-teaching staff. I think that works very well. Yeah. I see absolutely no reason why this wouldn't work. I mean, actually, my very first study in well-being back in 2002, when I started doing it, was in schools in Nottingham, and we found a correlation between feeling happy at school and attainment, but that was a weak result. It's not necessarily always absolutely true, but I do think if students are happy, they're working better. I haven't really looked at it in great detail, but I'd be very surprised if unhappy students outperformed happy students. Yeah.
Brilliant. I don't think we have any more questions that have come in just yet. So if anyone else has any other questions, then please send them in now.
Thanks so much for everyone for attending. Have you got so Angela will just put up a little NPS, you know, like thing. We just keep a score of it so that I know if I'm doing the webinar well or not. And I'm very open to feedback on what worked for you and what didn't. I obviously I'm a statistician. I try and give data each time to make a new angle on it. I do a webinar at least once a month. And so, yeah. Would it be possible to work in Germany? Right. So we do have clients across Europe, don't we? I don't know if we have it quite translated in German yet, but we certainly have people using it, Spanish, French, some other languages, so we can do it. And it's something that if you bring us a client, we'd work with you to do that. Ricardo, happy International Day to you too. Hope you're good, my friend. I know, Ricardo. Thanks,
lots
everyone.
of thank yous there.
Yeah. Good. Well, everyone have a good rest of the International Day of Happiness wherever you are in the world, and till